Quinn stood silently at the edge of the bustling military hangar, the first light of dawn stretching across the sky, casting a soft glow on the ground. The hangar was alive with movement, a chaotic symphony of technicians shouting orders, crews rolling pallets across the tarmac, and aircraft being prepped for the day's exercises. The noise was deafening, the urgency palpable, as planes like the FA18D Super Hornet were readied for high-stakes tests, their powerful engines humming as they came to life. Yet, amidst this flurry of activity, Quinn was nothing more than a quiet observer, her presence barely acknowledged, wearing a simple olive-green jumpsuit that matched the support staff's uniform. Quinn blended into the background. Her boots were clean, the soles dusted free of the resin that coated the flight line. But there was little about her that commanded attention. Her hands rested at her sides, fingers curled slightly under the belt of her suit, her logbook tucked neatly into her pocket. To anyone passing by, she was just another member of the support crew, a face among many, a silent presence. The sun's rays filtered through the hangar doors, casting long shadows over the concrete floor, but Quinn's focus never wavered. She watched, taking in every detail of the operations around her, but remained unseen, unnoticed. Inside the hangar, everyone seemed too busy to notice her. Crews hurried about, moving with practiced speed, prepping equipment, checking fuel levels, and securing weapons on various aircraft. Quinn didn't need to be told what needed to be done. She had been through it all before, countless drills, briefings, and emergency procedures. She could anticipate the next move, could predict the next sound before it even reached her ears. But today, her role was simple wait. Wait outside while the real pilots ran through their emergency drills. Wait until they were done. Until they needed her. Her logbook was open, the pages filled with meticulously detailed notes about the systems she'd been monitoring for weeks. They were not her assignments. No one had asked her to check the telemetry, verify the pressure levels, or make sure the hydraulics were primed, but she did it anyway. No one had requested it, but no one would be more prepared than she was. As the crews ran through their tasks, Quinn quietly recorded the status of each system, calculating redundancies in her head, knowing that every detail mattered. The hangar buzzed with activity, but it was as though she were standing outside of it, an observer rather than a participant. Yet Quinn understood something that the others didn't. Her moment was coming. She wasn't going to be recognized now, but when the time came, it would be her quiet preparation that made all the difference. She'd been overlooked before, dismissed for her gender, for her lack of a flashy title, but she had never let it define her. She was here for one reason: to make sure everything was ready when it mattered most. The sound of a crew chief shouting to a pilot broke through her thoughts. The urgency of the call a reminder that this was not a drill. The aircraft on the hot pad, still cold from the night, was about to become the focus of a high-stakes test. A test that would push both man and machine to their limits. Quinn was ready, but no one else knew it. She didn't mind. She had always been ready, even when no one else thought to ask her. Today, it might be someone else's name on the clipboard, someone else's turn to shine, but Quinn would be there, in the shadows, doing the work that no one else saw. The unsung hero, waiting quietly for her moment to arrive. This was the paradox of her existence, her expertise, her precision. The knowledge she held, it was all buried beneath the surface. She wasn't the one taking the lead, she wasn't the one on the front lines, but she knew something the others didn't sometimes. The people who are overlooked are the ones most prepared for the unexpected. And when the time came for someone to act, when the chaos escalated and everyone else was scrambling for answers, Quinn would be ready. She had trained for it, silently and methodically, for as long as she could remember. Despite the overwhelming energy around her, Quinn remained a calm center, a quiet force. As the sun rose higher, casting light on the chaos of the tarmac, it was clear that while others might scramble for recognition, Quinn had long since learned to find her strength in the quiet moments, in the unnoticed details, in the preparedness that no one else could see. When the storm hit, as it always did in this line of work, it would be Quinn's steady hand that held everything together. But for now, she waited, as always, in the wings, unnoticed but ever ready. Her isolation was not a burden. It was a quiet determination, the calm before the storm. It was not about being seen or recognized. It was about knowing that when everything fell apart, she would be there to pick up the pieces. Even if no one ever noticed, Quinn would still be there, doing what she did best, preparing for the moment that no one else could anticipate. Quinn stood at the edge of the tarmac, her eyes scanning the FA18D Super Hornet before her. The aircraft, sleek and imposing, was positioned in the middle of the hot pad, waiting to be prepped for the day's mission. The hum of activity around her was constant, yet Quinn remained a figure of calm, standing still amidst the frenzy. Her mind was already on the details, already working through the flight data she had reviewed the night before. Every system, every component of the aircraft had been etched into her memory, a result of years spent preparing for moments like this. While others rushed about, Quinn approached the Hornet with a quiet focus. She pulled her logbook from her jumpsuit pocket, its edges worn from constant use, and flipped through the pages to the section marked System Checks. The rest of the team, including the flight crew and maintenance staff, moved in a blur, shouting across the pad as they prepared the aircraft for testing. The technicians checked the fuel levels, the flight lead discussed the mission with the co-pilot, and the crew chief barked orders to the rest of the ground staff. But no one noticed Quinn. She wasn't the one in charge of these systems, yet she was the one who knew them best. With meticulous care, Quinn inspected the aircraft's wings, taking note of the small details that others overlooked. The wing flaps, the condition of the ailerons, the wear on the tires each had to meet exact specifications for the mission. Ahead, she made small adjustments to the pressure valves, calibrating instruments that weren't part of the standard check. Her movements were deliberate and quiet, with an efficiency born of countless hours spent ensuring every element of the aircraft was functioning properly. It wasn't a task she had been given. It was something she did because she knew the aircraft needed it. But to the others, she was just another technician, unnoticed and underappreciated. As she worked, Quinn's mind ran through the checklist she had memorized the night before, a mental rehearsal of every system she had already inspected. She knew the telemetry inside and out, having spent hours studying it until it became second nature. She could predict the system failures that might occur during the flight. One hydraulic variable, a bleed in the left engine cycle, a pressure vector that would strain the aircraft's structural limits. The others hadn't seen the breakdowns yet, but Quinn had already calculated them in her mind. Her actions, so focused and precise, spoke volumes about her experience and expertise, yet they went unnoticed. She checked the fuel levels, confirmed the calibration of the fuel feed, and ensured the backup systems were active. Every reading was recorded in her logbook, every adjustment noted with careful precision. The digital hum of the aircraft's electronics echoed in the background as the ground crew continued their noisy preparations. But Quinn moved through her work in silence. Each action was methodical, deliberate, not because anyone was watching, but because Quinn knew the importance of getting it right. If something went wrong during the flight, she would be the one to answer for it. It was her job to ensure nothing went wrong at all. The noise around her was relentless crews yelling, engines starting, and equipment being moved from one place to another. But Quinn's concentration remained unshaken. Her eyes flicked over the cockpit, inspecting the control panels, ensuring that every system was functioning within its optimal range. As she worked, a few passing technicians nodded at her, but their acknowledgement was brief, almost dismissive. Quinn's technical acumen was beyond their understanding, but they didn't know that. They assumed she was just doing her job, like anyone else in her position, without realizing how much deeper her expertise ran. She approached the cockpit, taking a moment to inspect the condition of the instruments. The seat, still in its neutral position, was ready for the pilot. The controls, toggles, and switches had all been tested, but Quinn didn't leave anything to chance. She ran her fingers along the yoke, making a mental note of the slight resistance in the left control. She adjusted it carefully, knowing that even the smallest malfunction could have serious consequences. During the flight, her hands were steady, moving with precision and care. As she made the final adjustments to the instrument panel, in the midst of all the commotion, no one had noticed Quinn's attention to detail. The crew chief passed by, focused on a different task, and the pilots continued their preparations without sparing a glance in her direction. Yet Quinn's work was the foundation of everything they were about to do. She wasn't just a technician. She was the silent guardian, the one who ensured that every system, every detail, was ready for the mission. But for all her effort, she remained invisible, her expertise overshadowed by the more visible roles of the flight crew. She stepped back, taking one last look at the aircraft. The engines were primed, the fuel lines secure, the communication systems ready for the mission ahead. The sun was now higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the tarmac as the Hornet stood ready to take flight. Quinn felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Her work was done, and it was perfect, as always. But she didn't expect praise or recognition. She didn't need it. The only thing that mattered was that the aircraft was ready. As the rest of the team continued their preparations, Quinn quietly walked away from the aircraft, her logbook tucked under her arm. She had done her job well, as always, but no one would know it until the mission was underway. For now, she would return to the shadows, waiting for the moment when everything fell apart and someone would need to take charge. Quinn knew that, and she was ready. The chaos around her, the loud voices, The rush of activity, they were all part of the process. But for Quinn, they were background noise. She was focused on the task at hand, a quiet professional who understood that true expertise was often the most unacknowledged. When the time came for action, Quinn would be ready, and that was all that mattered. She didn't need anyone else to notice. She had already prepared for the moment when no one else could act. It was only a matter of time before her quiet mastery became the difference between success and failure. The steady hum of the FA18D Super Hornet's engines echoed across the flight line, a constant backdrop to the rush of activity around Quinn. The morning had started like any other. The usual rush of pre-flight checks, the shouting of orders, and the hum of preparations filling the air. Quinn had completed her part already, her systems checks, the diagnostics, the recalibration of pressure and fuel lines, all done with her usual precision. She stood to the side now, waiting for the all-clear to return to the hangar, her logbook tucked under her arm. Then, the voice came over the comms, a sharp break in the steady flow of the morning. Emergency alert, FA18D Super Hornet, lead pilot unresponsive, systems failure detected. Quinn's head snapped toward the aircraft, the same plane she had just helped prep. A chill settled in her chest. But she didn't move yet. The urgency of the call was unmistakable. But Quinn didn't allow herself to panic. Her mind immediately began running through possibilities: a hydraulic failure, an issue with the avionics, or something more catastrophic. She could see it now. The slight, almost imperceptible drop in one of the pressure indicators that hadn't fully registered on the diagnostic screens yet. Quinn knew it was coming. The cascade of failures that would soon escalate. The air was thick with tension as the flight crew scrambled to assess the situation, their voices rising in urgency. Quinn could hear the confusion in their commands, their attempts to assess the pilot's status, but no clear solution was forming. The ground crew scattered, some moving to the aircraft, others checking their systems, while Quinn remained still, her gaze fixed on the Hornet. She could feel the weight of the situation, the chaos escalating around her. Yet, in that moment, Quinn was calm, focused. She had been here before, in smaller situations, in tests, in simulations. This wasn't a drill, but her instincts had already kicked in. She knew what needed to be done. As the crew chief barked orders and technicians rushed to assist, Quinn's hand hovered over her logbook, but she didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. She was already mentally calculating the failure sequences, running through each system. The left engine was likely overheating. She had seen the telltale signs during the pre-flight check, but it hadn't reached a critical point yet. The hydraulic pressure was already dipping below safe levels, and the artificial stability system was about to fail. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Quinn turned towards the aircraft, her steps decisive. The others were still shouting into radios, relaying information and waiting for the pilot to regain control. But Quinn had no time to waste. She couldn't rely on anyone else to act quickly enough. Her role had always been to observe, to prepare the aircraft, to troubleshoot from the back seat. But now, in this moment, she was the only one who truly understood the systems under duress. As she approached the cockpit, Quinn's mind was a blur of calculations, but her body remained calm. The pilot, Jared, had fallen unconscious, his head slumped forward, and the aircraft began to bank slightly. The instruments in the cockpit flashed warning signs. Quinn could see the red blinking lights of the warning systems. The Hornet was on the verge of a systems failure, and without intervention, it would spiral into an uncontrollable descent. Her hand rested on the rear control yoke, feeling its familiar contours, and she checked the rear seat console for input overrides. The control systems were still locked in diagnostic-only mode, but Quinn had anticipated this. She could override the lockouts manually if she had to. The others would never know. But she did. The override switch was there for a reason. She had to act, and she had to act now. As chaos erupted around her, Quinn's voice cut through the noise. Calm and clear. Jared is unresponsive. I'm assuming control. She heard the command center's voice crackle through the comms, urgent and stern. Negative. Rear seat is not certified for control. Quinn didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission. The flight was already beyond recovery by any other method. Quinn switched the console into manual control, her fingers dancing across the buttons, shifting the trim, adjusting the throttle. Her pulse remained steady. Though the aircraft continued to tilt, she could feel the pressure in her chest tighten, but she pushed the sensation aside, focusing on the instruments in front of her. The aircraft was still within her reach. It wasn't too late. As she began to stabilize the descent, the aircraft jerked in response to her changes. The airspeed indicator flickered, warning that they were exceeding safe limits. Quinn adjusted the trim, feathered the throttle to prevent the engines from stalling. She could feel the slight vibration in the stick as the aircraft settled into a slightly more controlled descent. The wing stress indicators blinked on her panel, showing an alarming level of lateral pressure. She knew this could lead to structural failure if not corrected. Quinn's hands tightened on the yoke, adjusting the trim just enough to release some of the stress. The ground control radio crackled again. "What's the status report?" Quinn's voice remained steady, betraying none of the anxiety that the others might have felt. "Control is regained. Stabilizing descent." She couldn't afford to get distracted by their panic. Quinn's mind was already on the landing sequence. It wasn't over yet. She glanced briefly at Lena, who was sitting behind her, wide-eyed and silent. The younger technician was no longer speaking, her hands gripping the seat with nervous energy, but Quinn didn't need words. The situation had shifted, and it was her moment to act. Quinn adjusted the flaps, reducing the stress on the wings, and pushed the nose slightly down, ensuring that the descent would be within tolerable parameters. The engine sputtered but held together. Quinn's focus was complete, no hesitation, no second thoughts. She knew what needed to be done, and she would make it happen. As the wind noise increased in the cockpit, signaling their rapid descent, Quinn's steady voice cut through the chaos. "We're on the correct vector, preparing for emergency landing." The voice from ground control continued to crackle, but Quinn ignored it. "Negative, maintain current descent angle," she said, overriding their instructions. She was beyond their reach now, locked in her own decision-making process. With one last adjustment, Quinn set the course for the runway, her calculated risk the only thing standing between them and disaster. For a brief moment, as the aircraft glided smoothly towards the runway, Quinn felt a fleeting sense of relief. She had done it. Despite the escalating crisis, despite the overwhelming chaos, Quinn had kept control. The aircraft, though damaged, was stable, and she had done it alone. It was no longer about procedure, it was about survival. The aircraft hit the runway hard, the wheels touching down with a jarring thud. The ground crew rushed toward them as the engines spooled down. Quinn didn't look back. She had done what was necessary, and the aircraft was safe. The adrenaline was still pumping through her veins, but Quinn's hands remained steady. She had been the one to act when no one else had the clear answer, and it had made all the difference. The moment of panic had passed, and Quinn was already moving on to the next task. There was no time for applause or recognition. The only thing that mattered was that she had kept the aircraft together, brought it down safely, and proven that even in the most chaotic moments, she could remain calm under pressure. The lesson had been learned. Quinn's ability to act decisively in a crisis could make all the difference even when no one expected her to lead. The cockpit was an assault on Quinn's senses buzzers, flashing warning lights, and the hum of failing systems. She had only moments to act. The calm she had felt moments before was now replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. Jared, the lead pilot, was slumped forward, unresponsive. His head was against the side of his harness, his left hand hanging loosely off the throttle. Quinn's eyes darted to the control panels, her mind already processing the information flooding in. She had seen the signs before, tiny shifts in the telemetry that had preceded every failure scenario in training, but this was real. This wasn't a drill. The FA18D Super Hornet was spiraling. The left engine was sputtering, losing power. The pressure in the hydraulics was dangerously low, and the pitch control was beginning to wobble. Quinn's breath slowed. She was no longer just an observer. She had become the only hope. Her training kicked in. Every second of practice on the simulator and in the field flooding back to her. She reached for the controls, her fingers already finding the familiar layout of the yoke and throttle. The aircraft was alive beneath her hands, yet it was slipping beyond her control. She needed to act fast before it was too late. Command was still trying to establish control, shouting over the comms for Quinn to stay back, to let the automated systems engage. But Quinn knew better. She could feel the aircraft's hesitation, the imbalance in the thrust, the way it was leaning toward the left wing. The pilot wasn't coming back. If she waited for permission, the plane would be lost. Quinn didn't hesitate. She reached forward, overriding the system's safety lockout. A smooth, practiced motion. The cockpit buzzed, a sharp warning pinging in her ear, but she ignored it. She was in control now, and it was her decision that would save them. With a swift motion, Quinn adjusted the throttle. The right engine roared back to life, but the left still struggled. She stabilized the descent, keeping her grip firm, calculating the aircraft's descent rate, adjusting the trim. The pitch control was off, the aircraft's nose dipping dangerously, but Quinn knew what to do. She tapped the left trim just enough to bring the nose back level. The Hornet hesitated, then responded. She could feel the pressure release from her shoulders as the aircraft began to stabilize, the violent shaking of the fuselage slowly fading. "Quinn, do not take control," came the voice from the comms again. Sharper this time, "Stay on diagnostics," but Quinn wasn't listening anymore. She was focused on the readouts before her. The stress levels were too high, the wind shear too severe. If they didn't correct course soon, they'd be at risk of tearing apart mid-flight. The danger was real, and she couldn't wait for command to approve her actions. She didn't need approval, she needed to act. Her fingers worked with precision as she fine-tuned the throttle. She could feel the aircraft's power growing, the right engine roaring to compensate for the left's weak thrust. She adjusted the trim again, just a fraction, to relieve the strain on the wing. With every small change, the plane seemed to respond, the shaking in the airframe lessening. But the real test was still ahead. She had to land this aircraft. She knew what was coming, knew how fast the situation was deteriorating, but she couldn't show it. Calm, steady, calculated. Quinn's pulse was steady as she entered the final approach. Her hand rested on the yoke, fingers gently tapping, adjusting the pitch. She kept her eyes on the horizon, the faint outline of the runway just within view. The wind was a factor now, a crosswind that would make the landing tricky. But Quinn had trained for this. She knew every scenario. Her grip tightened around the yoke as the wind gusted harder, and she compensated, shifting her approach to align with the runway. The aircraft responded, every adjustment a battle. But Quinn's mastery over the aircraft's systems was undeniable. The comms crackled again, but Quinn's voice cut through the chaos. "This is November 6th. I have control. Preparing for emergency landing." The words were simple, but they carried weight. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation. She was in charge now, and nothing was going to take that away from her. Her heart raced as she adjusted the flaps, preparing for the final approach. Every part of the aircraft was under her command, her actions decisive. The ground control was still arguing, still unsure, but Quinn knew what needed to be done. She had already analyzed the flight dynamics, understood the risk. The landing gear indicator flickered, but Quinn remained unfazed. She adjusted the gear manually, confirming that it was locked into place. The Hornet was now at the right altitude, the speed steady, the pitch nearly perfect. The runway was within reach, and Quinn allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. She had taken control, and the aircraft was no longer on the verge of disaster. But there was no time to rest. The descent was steep, the speed was critical, and every second counted. Quinn's mind was calculating every detail, every calculation, every adjustment made with precision, without second-guessing. As the Hornet neared the runway, Quinn eased back on the throttle, slowing the descent. The aircraft's wheels were just inches from the tarmac when she finally let go of the yoke, letting the aircraft settle with a soft thud on the runway. The braking systems engaged, and Quinn allowed herself one final glance at the control panel. Everything was still intact. The aircraft was safe. She did not look back as the ground crew rushed toward them. There would be no accolades, no cheering, but in that moment, Quinn knew she had done what no one else could. She had acted when everyone else was frozen, and she had saved the mission. It wasn't about the recognition or the thanks. It was about being ready when it mattered most. The control tower crackled again, this time with a simple, respectful reply copy. "November 6th, emergency services en route." Quinn let out a quiet breath and powered down the systems. She didn't need to hear anything more. The job was done. She had stepped beyond the boundaries others had set for her, and in doing so, had proven that sometimes the moment demands more than what's expected. Sometimes it demands leadership, even when you're not in charge. The FA18D Super Hornet groaned under the pressure, its engines sputtering. But Quinn's hands were steady. The descent was faster than she had anticipated, but she had no time for doubt. Her focus was absolute, every movement measured. The aircraft was still descending too quickly, far more than it should, but Quinn was prepared. She adjusted the throttle, just enough to ease the descent, easing pressure on the engines. The controls responded, the plane stabilizing as she brought the speed down gradually, just enough to keep them in a safe zone. With a quick glance at the altimeter, Quinn checked their altitude again. Still too high. The runway was approaching fast, but it was still too early to deploy the landing gear. She calculated the optimal timing, running through the numbers in her head. It was a delicate balance too early, and the gear wouldn't lock in time. Too late, and she risked losing control in the final moments. Her hands moved on instinct now, adjusting the trim as she fought to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway, the crosswind battering them as they descended. The Hornet's systems flickered on the panel in front of her, several failures. the cockpit lights flashing a frantic red, but Quinn wasn't fazed. She didn't have time to dwell on what was going wrong. Instead, she focused on what was within her control, keeping her mind centered on each task: speed, altitude, descent angle. These were the only things that mattered now. She had flown this pattern before grueling hours in the simulator, perfecting these maneuvers under every condition. But this time, the stakes were real. The aircraft was breaking down, the weight of responsibility heavy in her chest. But Quinn's resolve only grew stronger. With a sharp breath, Quinn pushed the yoke forward slightly, lowering the nose just enough to reduce the descent rate. The ground below was coming up fast, but she kept her movements precise, calm. The landing gear indicator blinked, warning her of a potential issue, but she ignored it. She wasn't going to let anything stop her. The final moments were closing in, and the noise of the wind and the engine failure became a distant hum. She had already calculated the distance to the runway. She had already calculated how much more she could afford to lose in altitude before she had to deploy the gear. The aircraft shook again, but Quinn's hands were steady. She couldn't afford to make any errors now. The altitude was too low. There was no room for mistakes. The runway was coming into view. Quinn could see the emergency vehicles waiting, their flashing lights reflecting off the tarmac. They would be ready, but it was Quinn who was in charge now. The aircraft was still hers to land. Her only concern was the smoothness of the descent, the precision required to keep them within a manageable speed. Nothing else mattered. She deployed the landing gear at precisely the right moment. The aircraft settled slightly with the confirmation of the lock, the nose dropping just a fraction as the wheels extended. She checked the airspeed once more. The wind was still unpredictable, the gusts pushing them slightly off course, but she adjusted the rudder to compensate, keeping the Hornet aligned. Her left hand hovered over the throttle, adjusting it in small increments, keeping the speed within the safe range. The Hornet was responding well now, stabilizing under her control as she continued the descent. The moment she had been waiting for was near. The runway stretched out before her, the surface of the tarmac now visible in crisp detail. She could see the painted lines, the threshold lights marking the landing zone. Everything was in position, and yet, the aircraft still felt heavy in her hands. She adjusted the trim once more, the nose coming down slowly as she focused on the glide path. The Hornet was still struggling to maintain speed, but it was no longer a crisis. Quinn had done what was necessary. She was getting them down, and that was all that mattered. Quinn's eyes never wavered from the runway. She checked the distance again, the remaining altitude on her panel, and the rate of descent. It was tight, too tight, but it was manageable. A few more feet, a few more seconds. She could do this. The aircraft, despite its systems failures, despite its shaking, had one last chance at survival. She was determined to make that chance count. Quinn pushed the yoke forward gently, keeping the nose level, allowing the wheels to come into contact with the tarmac. With the lightest of touches, the landing gear took the weight, and for a split second, the aircraft seemed to float. The impact was soft, almost imperceptible, but Quinn could feel it in her spine as the aircraft touched down. She immediately began to apply the brakes, carefully controlling the deceleration. The emergency vehicles were already moving, their sirens wailing in the distance, but Quinn's focus remained absolute. She had done it. The aircraft was safe. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little as she guided the Hornet down the runway, feeling the speed drop with each second. The final roll to a stop was smooth, and Quinn disengaged the throttle completely. Her hands, though still steady, felt the weight of the moment. She had done what no one expected, what she had never been trained to do, but she had done it anyway. The Hornet was now completely stopped, the engines winding down to a quiet hum. The ground crew was moving closer, the emergency vehicles now in position, but Quinn remained calm. The job wasn't finished until the aircraft was completely secured, but the immediate danger had passed. The cockpit was silent now, save for the soft beep of the warning systems resetting. Quinn didn't need to hear the accolades, the words of praise, or the cheers from the emergency crews. She knew the job had been done right. She had acted when no one else had the clear answer, and she had saved them all. She had brought the Hornet to the ground through all the chaos, with quiet precision and unwavering resolve. As she powered down the systems, Quinn's hands moved mechanically, automatically. She didn't need to look around to know that the crew would be watching her now, their gazes filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. But Quinn didn't care about that. Her focus had been on the mission, on bringing the plane down safely, and she had done it. The aircraft was still. The noise of the engines had stopped. The Hornet had landed, and Quinn had quietly carried out a task no one else was ready to take on. And in the silence of that moment, She knew she had proven something more important than any recognition she had, proven to herself that when everything seemed to be falling apart, her steady hands could hold it all together. Quinn's boots hit the tarmac with a soft, deliberate thud, each step measured as she walked away from the Hornet. The emergency crew was already rushing toward the aircraft, their sirens wailing in the distance as they converged. But Quinn didn't look back. Her mind wasn't on the chaos behind her. It was already moving past the crisis. The work had been done. The aircraft was on the ground. The crew was safe. Her hands were still steady, but her mind was calculating the next steps, the next task. She had already moved on. The air was thick with tension as the technical team began their work, reviewing the data from the flight. The rumble of their voices filled the air, but Quinn kept walking, her gaze ahead, her steps steady. They would be analyzing everything: the aircraft's systems, the responses she'd made, the adjustments. No one had expected the rapid precision with which she had brought the Hornet down. No one had anticipated how quickly she had taken control. It was a blur to her now, just a series of quick decisions, one after another. But for the team reviewing the data, it was clear Quinn's actions had been exactly what had saved them all. As she made her way toward the hangar, Quinn felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Major Soren, the operations chief, standing just behind her, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. "Your response time was impressive," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of respect. There was no praise, no applause, just recognition of the action itself. He continued, "The control inputs you made, they saved the aircraft." His words were blunt, but they carried weight. Quinn nodded, the corners of her mouth turning slightly. But she didn't break stride. "Thank you, sir." It wasn't much of a response, but it was all that was needed. Quinn wasn't interested in recognition. She wasn't looking for accolades or applause. She had done what was necessary, and that was enough. Recognition wasn't the goal. What mattered was that she had done her job and done it well. The Major watched her for a moment longer, perhaps waiting for more. But Quinn was already focused on the next task. Her mind shifted away from the debriefing. She didn't need to be reminded of the risk or the danger she had lived it in. Real time, the sense of urgency, the adrenaline that had driven her during the descent, was already fading. Now, there was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the aircraft was safe, and that she had made the right call when it mattered most. Quinn continued walking without another word, her pace deliberate but unhurried. The ground crew was still gathering around the Hornet, preparing to assess the damage, but Quinn didn't need to watch them. They would be fine. She had ensured it. There was no need for the heavy praise she might have received if things had gone wrong. In Quinn's world, success wasn't measured by how loudly others recognized it. It was about the work itself, the quiet confidence of knowing that she had done her best. As Quinn walked through the hangar, the noise of the flight line and emergency vehicles behind her began to fade. She slipped through the door, her logbook tucked under her arm. The quiet of the hangar felt familiar, like a sanctuary from the chaos she had just experienced. But even here, in the quiet space, she didn't stop moving. There was more to be done, more systems to check, more planes to prepare. Her mind was already jumping to the next task. Her footsteps echoed on the cold concrete floor as she made her way to her workstation. She didn't need to hear the crew chief's praise or the technicians' compliments. Quinn had already done the work that mattered, and in her mind, that was the only thing that counted. The data was already being reviewed, and while she knew her quick actions had been critical, she also knew that recognition from others wasn't the point. Later, as Quinn sat at her desk, the sound of voices and the hum of the flight line continued to pulse in the background. The technical team would go over the flight data, and they would probably marvel at how quickly she had stabilized the Hornet's descent. But she was already on to the next task, already thinking about the next piece of work that needed her attention. The quiet pride she felt was not in the recognition she was getting, but in the fact that she had done the job without hesitation. Major Soren came by once more, his footsteps heavy as he approached her station. He looked at her for a long moment, but again, there was no fanfare, no words of congratulations. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. "Keep up the good work," he said, his voice low but genuine. Quinn simply nodded in acknowledgement. She knew what that meant. The mission had been a success, and she had done it on her own terms. No one had asked her to step in. No one had given her permission to take control. She had done it because it was what needed to be done. And for her, that was enough. Quinn's eyes shifted back to her logbook. She didn't look for praise. She wasn't interested in the accolades others might have clamored for. The work was the reward. And as she continued to write in her logbook, noting the specifics of the flight, Quinn felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had done her job, with the kind of precision and calm that was required in those high-pressure moments. It wasn't about being seen or celebrated. It was about knowing that when the call had come, she had been ready. As the day wore on, Quinn's work continued in the background. She prepared for the next shift, checking systems, running diagnostics, and doing the work that needed to be done. The quiet hum of the hangar was a perfect reflection of her state of mind-focused, determined, and undistracted. No fanfare, no recognition, just the calm certainty that she had done her part. As always, the morning light stretched across the airfield as Quinn walked, her steps steady and sure, cutting through the noise and bustle of the flight line. For the first time, the crew wasn't just passing by her without a glance, they were watching. It wasn't the frantic, dismissive gaze of the past. Now, their eyes followed her with a certain respect, a quiet recognition of her actions the day before. There was no applause, no loud fanfare, but Quinn could feel it. She had earned their acknowledgement. Her shoulders were squared, her movements purposeful. She wasn't walking any differently than she had before, but the way the crew looked at her had changed. She could hear the chatter around her, the conversations carried by the wind. The pilots, the technicians, the crew chiefs, all of them now knew. They knew what she was capable of, what she had done. But Quinn didn't seek their recognition. Her mind was already on the next task ahead. The work wasn't done. She had never been one to stand still for long, and there was always something that needed attention. Her internal focus had shifted from the chaos of yesterday to the steady rhythm of today. Every action she took was done with a quiet dedication, the same quiet determination that had defined her throughout her career. The airfield was quieter now, the morning rush beginning to calm as Quinn made her way toward the briefing room. She entered, her presence calm and composed as always. There was no need to announce herself, no need to explain. Her actions from the day before spoke louder than words. The room shifted subtly as Quinn walked in. Her colleagues recognizing her for more than just a technician now, she wasn't a shadow on the outskirts of the operation anymore. She was an integral part of it, but the way she carried herself was unchanged. No boast, no arrogance, just a quiet mastery of the work at hand. Major Soren was already there, discussing the next assignment with the flight team. When he saw Quinn enter, he nodded at her, his acknowledgement a subtle but significant shift. There was no need for words. His actions conveyed everything. Quinn's presence now commanded respect, not because of any title or rank, but because of the trust she had earned through the calm precision she had shown under pressure. She took her seat, her eyes already scanning the flight plan for her next task. As the briefing began, Quinn's focus was entirely on the mission ahead, the calculations, the systems, the adjustments that would be needed. Her mind was already in motion, her thoughts already working through the details. The others may have been congratulating her in their own way, but Quinn wasn't thinking about that. She had learned long ago that recognition wasn't the goal. It was the work itself, the mastery of her craft, the quiet dedication to every detail, no matter how small. That was what mattered to her. The meeting concluded with the assignment of roles, and when it came time to discuss the next flight, Quinn's name was called. The room went quiet, as if waiting for her response. She didn't hesitate. Her voice, calm and clear, confirmed her readiness for the flight. It wasn't a matter of proving herself anymore, it was just another task, another challenge. She had done the hard part. Now, it was simply about executing. As the team filtered out of the briefing room, Quinn stayed behind for a moment, collecting her notes. She didn't need to linger. There was nothing more to discuss. Her presence was already felt, and her confidence was evident. But it wasn't the loud kind of confidence, the kind that demanded attention. No, Quinn's confidence was quiet, a result of years of preparation and steady, unflinching commitment to the work. When she stepped back out into the daylight, Quinn didn't glance around at the others who had gathered outside. She didn't need to see their faces. She didn't need to feel their judgment or approval. What mattered was the job ahead of her, the first official flight as a pilot. Candidate? It was a new chapter, but it wasn't a leap into something unknown. It was simply the next step in a journey she had already been on for years. She had earned this opportunity, not by seeking it, but by quietly mastering every task, every challenge that had come her way. Her boots tapped against the concrete as she walked toward the hangar, her gaze steady. The aircraft was waiting for her, ready for the next phase of the mission. Quinn's hands were steady as she suited up, as she checked the systems, as she ran through the pre-flight protocol. This was no different than any other mission. It wasn't about making a statement or proving anything. It was simply about being ready, and Quinn was ready. As she climbed into the cockpit, her fingers moving over the familiar controls, a sense of quiet fulfillment settled in her chest. She wasn't looking for recognition from anyone else. She had already earned her place. The flight ahead would be challenging, but Quinn didn't fear it. She was in control now, and that was all that mattered. The journey had always been hers, and now she was moving toward the next horizon, ready for whatever came next. This was her moment not because it was special, but because it was another step in her steady ascent. And as she prepared to take off, Quinn knew one thing for sure: she controlled her future now.